One's a Chiefs fan, the other's a Pats fan, and together they make Primetime Dimes.
What's up, my fellow football fanatics? Welcome back to episode 13 of Primetime Dimes, your weekly source for surviving the offseason and breaking down the headlines during the season. I'm one of your hosts, Chelsea, and with me as always is Milton. Hello.
Hey, so I'm seeing a new mic here, I think.
Yeah, so the reason why we had sort of the reason why our episode was late last week, but yes, lo and behold, some mic issues have led me to a new one, so I got this bad boy in front of me now.
Yeah, it looks good. It looks good.
I hope it sounds good.
I think it sounds good on my end, but we'll have to see what the listeners have to say. Let us know if you think the quality's all right.
Let me know if I'm crap.
But because we had to record a little bit later, we actually were able to give more updated news in the college episode, where at the time of recording, college players were kind of seemingly about to be allowed to be paid or sign endorsement deals. And since then, we have seen the NCAA say that players could be paid by Barstool Sports, and that Barstool is planning to sponsor college athletes.
Yeah. So shortly after the NCAA announced that players could have endorsements, a bunch of players reached out to Barstool and was like, how to become a Barstool athlete. So Dave Portnoy went to social media and went live and was like, if you want to be a Barstool athlete, if you want us to send you to parties, you want Barstool merch, you want pizza, I'll give it to you. And so if you actually go to Barstool's link tree on their social media, there is a thing you can click on to become a Barstool athlete. I think that's insane.
That's so cool. I didn't see that at all. The only thing that I saw was my boy Spencer Radler, of course. He almost immediately signed with an NIL agent, and has subsequently signed a deal or an endorsement deal with Cane's Chicken House. It's a very famous place in the States. They're in Oklahoma, from my understanding. I'm Canadian. I've never tried it. I would love to try it. It looks phenomenal. So that was really cool to see. And at the same time, as all these younger athletes were celebrating the fact that they were going to be eligible to get paid, we had one of the most prolific college athletes start speaking out about wanting his Heisman reinstated and all of his awards. So if you're not familiar with Reggie Bush, in 2005, he won the Heisman, beating out finalists such as Vince Young, who went on to have a phenomenal career in the NFL, as well as his own teammate who had won the Heisman the year previous, in Matt Leinart. And then, his stats in that year were just ridiculous. He had 200 rushing attempts where he racked up 1,700 yards. That's an average of 8.7 yards per carry, which is unheard of from my understanding. I see those numbers, and I'm not even a college fan, but I knew who Reggie Bush was. So I don't know how much you actually knew about this, Chelsea, but in 2010, an NCAA investigation ruled that Bush would have been ineligible to participate as a student athlete at USC because him and his family had received about $300,000 worth of product or merch or scholarships, like money and gifts basically had come Bush's way as well as his family's way, that ultimately ended up in, I believe, his family buying a house near USC. And during that investigation, it did come out that had they not received that money, there was no way Bush would have been able to financially afford to go to USC. So it raised the idea that, well, if it weren't for this money, he wouldn't have actually gone to USC. Therefore, he would not have gotten these ridiculous records. Therefore, should not have gotten the Heisman. So prior to the Heisman Trust actually going in and removing the award from Reggie Bush, he vacated it. And so he gave it back to them. Now, once the news came out that the NILs and student athletes were allowed to be paid, you had a ton of current and past NFL players yelling and like speaking out that Reggie Bush should get his Heisman Award back. And if you follow me on Twitter, I was sharing some of this stuff. Like, I'm all for it. I believe thoroughly this gentleman deserves to have this award back, because it's not like it was performance enhancing drugs, or it's not like he was, getting money that made him play better. I see the argument that he should not have received this money, but I don't see how it takes away from his accomplishments. And as of this morning, the Heisman Trust has said that if the NCAA reinstates all of his award or records, they will give him back his Heisman Trophy. So I'm really, really hoping we see this happen. I don't know. Had you ever heard about this with how big of a college fan you are?
I knew that he had them taken away. I didn't know why. So this makes a lot more sense now. But yeah, I think he deserves to get them back. I think, like you said, it's ridiculous that he wouldn't have been able to go to that school if it wasn't for the help he received. And with that Supreme Court case that just happened as well, saying that, schools can basically hand out however much money they want for educator related benefits, this would have fallen under that specifically. So it makes perfect sense that I wouldn't see why the NCAA won't reinstate his records and he'll get the Heisman back that he deserved.
Yeah, I just find it super ironic that currently there are 2 murderers who hold Heisman trophies and still hold the Heisman Trophy, but someone who was declared quote unquote a cheater, though I don't understand necessarily how it is cheating in the game and the integrity of the game, does not. I had to vacate his. So time will only tell. Hopefully, next week or the next time we discuss college football, I'll be able to update and say, yay, he has his Heisman Trophy back.
I hope we can say that.
It would be amazing.
I would.
But moving on, we just entered a new month, and so we're into July now. And this is actually quite significant for NFL, if you didn't know. So come July 15th, that represents a deadline where teams can no longer extend franchise tagged players. So I don't know if you know, I believe we've previously discussed franchise tags, but ultimately when you extend a franchise tag, it is specifically for a 1-year contract. And ideally, a lot of these players want to play on longer contracts, barring injuries. We saw what happened to Dak Prescott last year. And so this year, it actually applies to 7 players, a few of whom are very notable. So you have Allen Robinson. He plays over for the Bears. He's a wide receiver. He will be a very important piece for who I would believe is going to be Justin Fields in the long run at quarterback. Then you have Chris Godwin. He's, I want to say a big piece in the Tampa offense as a wide receiver, but ultimately I believe he was underutilized last year, so only time will really tell. He's a speedy guy. And then the remainder are just various defensive players as well as a few safeties. We'll see what happens with them. I don't see any of these people seeing an extension, especially someone like Chris Godwin. The Bucs don't have the money, and what better way than to franchise this player, hopefully win another Super Bowl, and then let him go.
Yeah, I'm not too familiar how the franchise tags work, so I guess we'll just see what happens when that news breaks.
Yeah, it will be interesting to watch. But moving on, in big news, yet somewhat recurrent news, Josh Gordon files for NFL reinstatement. So he's hoping to be with the team for training camp, and he has passed multiple random drug tests over the last 3 months. I guess for the listeners who do not know about Josh Gordon, he's a former wide receiver for the Seahawks, Patriots, He's had stints at various teams. Now, he is known to have had severe issues with cannabis, as well as it is thought to be cocaine and other drugs, but we do not have confirmation on the other drugs. He has tested positive for cocaine previously. And he has been also very open about his mental health struggles. So because of that, there has been the NFL's involvement in trying to not only get him into a recovery program, but also a rehab program, as well as a program that focuses on building better approaches to kind of dealing with the mental health and making sure that he has safer methods for dealing with some of the demons he is facing. So I personally hope everything works out, but Chelsea, do you think we have any reason to believe this will be better than last time?
I mean, he's putting in the work. He's passing the drug test. I think he's agreed to go to rehab. I can't say too much on that part, but it looks like he's putting in the work to be able to be reinstated. So I hope this is a new and improved Josh Gordon that we're going to see enter. And if he does.
Yeah, I'm very intrigued to see what happens. I obviously want what's best for Flash. He is, people forget that in a 4-game stint, he almost racked up 1,000 yards. Like, he had 774 receiving yards in a 4-game stint. This dude is a game changer, and I don't think he's ever been able to show the league exactly what he can do because he's had all these off-field issues. I wonder if the fact that the league is no longer testing for cannabis is going to play a role in him actually being able to remain, or let's see what he has to do with coping. But there's only so much speculation you can talk about. It's good to hear his name and that he's hopefully back in this league because he's dynamic. And other, I guess, more social media type news, the darn Dallas Cowboys are going to be featured on the show Hard Knocks. And I just want to know who asked for this. And
not me.
Why
Not
are
me.
they? This is what, the third or fourth time they're going to be.
I think this is like maybe the best time to be following the Dallas Cowboys, especially with Dak coming off of his injury. So that's probably why he's gotten it. I would have loved them to follow Trevor Lawrence's rookie season. I thought that would have been a lot more intriguing than watching Dak come back into the game. But I mean, that's just my opinion.
But there's also the Netflix show that follows them through training camp. That's not Hard Knocks. I forget the name of it, but there's always a chance that's the Jaguars or something.
Yeah, there's another one. I think Amazon Prime follows, is it All or Nothing? And they follow college football teams.
It ranges,
That's the
right?
other
Because
one.
they have followed like
Yeah.
Man United or Man City. I love that show. That show's great.
Just sports in general. I just remember seeing that they did a few college ones. I have it on my to watch list.
Yeah, no, I think it's great. It's always interesting to get kind of say on or kind of see what happens behind the scenes. And so, sorry about that. So, the final news topic, I guess, for this week is not a good one. It's actually very hard to see. So the NFL announced on Thursday that it was going to be fining the Washington football team $10 million following a workplace review. Now, did you know this workplace review was going on?
I had no idea. I read the article and I was like, this happened? Like, that's a thing?
Yeah. So I'm going to read a couple paragraphs, not super long, but a few paragraphs that kind of outline what happened. So for many years, the workplace environment at the Washington football team, both generally and particularly for women, was highly unprofessional. Bullying and intimidation frequently took place, and many described the culture as one of fear, and numerous female employees reported having experienced sexual harassment and a general lack of respect in the workplace. Ownership and senior management paid little or no attention to these issues. In some instances, senior executives engaged in inappropriate conduct themselves, including use of demeaning language and public embarrassment. This set the tone for the organization and led to key executives believing that disrespectful behavior and more serious misconduct was acceptable in the workplace. The problems were compounded by inadequate HR staff and practices and the absence of an effectively and consistently administered process for reporting or addressing employee complaints, as well as a widely reported fear of retaliation. When reports were made, they were generally not investigated and led to no meaningful discipline or response. Dan Snyder has acknowledged that, as the club's owner, he is responsible for the culture. Owners are obligated to set an appropriate tone and establish appropriate standards, development, and implement appropriate policies, including a policy of non-retaliation. So this did not occur at the Washington club this did occur at Washington for a very long time, and Dan Snyder has acknowledged that it had occurred for way too long. So he is taking responsibility for the workplace and understanding that it was understanding his role that he played in building a poor or toxic workplace. However, do you think $10 million is enough to a billionaire he ultimately would be worth billions of dollars because he owns he has an asset that is worth at least a couple $1 billion. Is this enough, or does this matter? Is this just we have to look like we're doing something?
I think the NFL finding them the money is them thinking that that's enough. And I'm not too concerned about the amount of money. They could have fined them $1 million. They could have fined them $20 million. Excuse me. What I would be more concerned about if they really wanted to say something and if the owner is truly taking responsibility for it is that he should be gone. If this was all his fault, if it ultimately falls on him, they should have a new owner. I really could care less how much money they're getting fined. Yeah, 10 million's enough, sure. It's enough money. It's not enough that they've done. I personally think, especially as a woman who watches football, and this being a more or less a woman's issue, I don't think just fining them is enough.
Yeah, I was wondering if you would call for his ownership. I
want blood.
Yeah, I have seen numerous tweets and reports calling for his ownership, and I absolutely agree with them. Part of me also wonders, it is a boys club up there, so maybe some of the boys don't actually find issue with it. I do wish we had seen maybe a more severe penalty in terms of, okay, let's go after your draft. Let's go after salary cap, because they're not going to vote.
They would never go after the actual players for something that happens off the field.
Yeah.
That's personally, that's a little too far and unfair. I think taking the people out of the position that let this happen is the best way to go about it. But it has been
done. Ownership issues outside of the game have caused the NFL to force teams to, lose draft picks. So it is, the precedence has been there for something like this. That's why it's I wouldn't want to penalize the players themselves, but the only way you're going to make owners not do things is take away their best chances at winning. And if you take away the
owner.
Yeah, but the NFL can't remove an owner because the owners all have to vote out other owners.
Yeah, and
so
if
you're
all
not
of
going
this
to
is
get that.
happening,
Yeah.
if all this is happening at the higher level, you think they're all going to vote out someone that was in on it too?
Yeah, that's kind of what I'm wondering.
Bullshit.
Yeah, and actually, while we don't have a friend in the NFL, we are very privileged to know someone who works for Maple Leaf Sports Entertainment, who actually own the Toronto Raptors, as well as a couple other of Toronto's professional sports teams. So we actually decided to get her on the show to hear about her opinions on working as a female and as a person of color in the professional sport atmosphere. So let's hear what she has to say.
All right, so we have a special guest joining us on the show this week. Personally, I met her through our sorority at two different schools. Every year, sorority, well, minus the pandemic, we typically go to a Jays game together with all of the sisters across Canada. And I was lucky enough to meet Naj and some other sisters from across Canada in the 2018 game that we went to. And what a beautiful friendship that has blossomed from this. So I'm very excited. She's a former player in our fantasy league and currently works in the sports industry. So I'm very happy to welcome Naj to the show. Hey, girl.
Hey.
Hello. Thank you so much for having me. And I almost forgot the fantasy league nugget of
That
a
almost
story there. I think that's
in.
You're gonna have to tell it because it's almost too good not to tell, and
So,
really
I don't know.
my knowledge of football.
I don't know if this has ever happened in another fantasy league, but Naj was kind enough to join us for a second season when we desperately needed another person and said, I will gladly just join and let my team run its course. She auto-drafted her team, did not touch it the entire time. I'm pretty sure I lost the week I played to you when you had someone on the IR and was on your actual starting roster. And she ended up in the championship game. She lost, but had she won, there would have been asterisks on that trophy.
But like that would have been so proud.
And I don't believe in asterisks.
Just absolutely iconic. But I'm happy we have you on the show today. How's your summer going?
It's going as good as it can be. I am double vaxxed, so really excited to be getting outside. Finally. So I think things are looking up this summer.
Yay. And do you want to tell everyone what you do for your work and how it's been over the summer months?
For sure. So I am an account executive in membership at Maple Leaf Sports and Entertainment. And what that really means is I look after season seat holders for the Toronto Maple Leafs, for Toronto Raptors, and Toronto FC. And I'm responsible for retaining their business year after year. As you can imagine, with us having no sports games in Toronto, that has been tremendously challenging, to say the least. It's very weird to ask for people's business when you don't have anything to give to them. So that has been the major challenge, I think, with our organizations and probably across multiple leagues as well.
So is there something that you're doing to like supplement the season holders that you haven't been able to get in the stands?
Yeah, so I don't know if you've noticed this, but over the NBA season, we've started to do some virtual arena hosting, and so people would log into their computer, log into Zoom, and have sort of a screen view of the game and be able to talk to others who would normally be in their section, so their seatmates, and have a little bit of banter that way. It's nowhere near the same experience, but it's something.
Wow.
But it's definitely been challenging. I think we're all really itching to get back to in person.
I didn't even know that. Like, was that an option when they were down in the bubble as well? Like, when you'd see them on the screens, they also had an opportunity to talk to people that were near them? Oh. I thought it was super awkward initially. I was like, oh, are they just sitting in front of their screens, drinking a beer, watching the playoffs play out in the bubble? And
You're
I'm like,
describing my
cool.
whole pandemic.
Yeah, but you didn't pay like X amount of money to be able to sit in front of
I
your
paid
screen.
for the beers.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. So it was sort of like a chat room experience a little bit. And
That's
so
kinda
it was something, right? You get a little bit of that interaction, that social interaction with others. But of course, nowhere near the real thing.
Oh, that's so cool. And I hadn't even thought about how weird that could have been just sitting there. But I was wondering, when did you know you wanted to work in sports? Was it an all your life thing or just something that you realized you could do by when you were going through your schooling?
Yeah, exactly. It's more so the latter. So, to be completely honest, I didn't know that people could work in sports when I was younger, up
Other
until
than athletes.
a very long time, actually. Yeah, yeah. Well, because if you think about it, like this would have been like 20 years ago. I'm like watching TV. We don't really have the internet to be able to like look up, we don't have Google. You don't really know what your options are in terms of careers. Like you see athletes on TV and you see like maybe sideline reporters and analysts and especially 20 years ago, none of them were women. Even now, hardly any of them are women. They're white women, but none of them looked like me. And so it had never even crossed my mind that that would even be an option. And I've played basketball my whole life, like since I was very small. And I happened to be good at it and I happened to play competitively. And even then, I was like, okay, maybe like I can go to WNBA, but like even then, maybe. And then I stopped growing at 5'6" and realized that was never gonna happen for me.
Still taller than me, girls. Still
And then
taller
I
than
just
me.
started working in marketing.
That's
Started working in marketing, and eventually I realized like there are people who are doing this, but like for a sports team, like that's a thing. And then when I started to realize that that was going to be maybe a possibility, it was definitely a long road from there to even be where I am right now.
yeah, it was so cool. And I don't know if you know this, actually, you probably don't know this. You're one of the first women I know to be in the field. And I'll say in the field loosely because it pertains to every aspect that goes into professional sports. And from seeing you participate, even from abroad, and this is what's so lovely about the sisterhood, is that we can see everyone growing without necessarily having tons of conversations with one another. And it was nice to see, and it was more like, oh, we do belong even in the background, or not background, but behind the scenes there are places for us. And it was I do health research and I focus in neuroscience and concussion history and stroke, neuronal recovery following stroke, which is just a really fancy way of saying I love the brain and what happens to the brain post injury. And then I started searching for what could be done at any sport. I could not care less which sport. I am a competitive soccer player. So I grew up playing soccer and moved along and played provincial and was going to go hopefully try and play nationally, and then got injured. And that kind of moved me into researching concussions and being interested about concussions. And the NFL just recently started publishing health researcher positions. And so that's when I reached out to Chelsea being like, hey, we should get Naj on to give her perspective of what life is like in the professional sports. So I was wondering, how do you see women being involved in professional sports in the future, if you have any insight?
I think that's a very loaded question, but I'm glad you asked it because there is so much opportunity, right? Like you just said, you're a former athlete who initially you would think like my path is as an athlete in the world of sports, but what we don't realize is there are so many people behind an organization that help it run. And those positions are, I mean, they're anywhere from like the field of science to engineering, technology, like statistics, game presentations, like it just goes on, and we're not aware of how much opportunity there is. But in terms of to what extent I see women involved, I think to the fullest extent. Like my personal wish is to have a female-dominated sports industry. I think, and I don't know how people might feel about that, but I think we're only making up for centuries of being in the shadows. So, like, it's owed to us. I think about Becky Hammon, for example, being up for a head coaching job in the NBA. Even though it didn't pan out, the fact that she was in the running for it just gives me so much hope. And it's something that I wish I had seen like 10, 20 years ago. So,
is that what you would have wanted to try and attain, or is that?
I think knowing that something like that is a possibility would have given me a lot more drive to push for a career in sports. Whereas I think I landed in my role with a lot of, yes, persistence, but also some luck and some timing. But had I known that there was a place for me and that I did belong there, I think I would have pursued it a lot more aggressively. And I think there would have been a lot more me's out there pursuing it more aggressively.
Yeah,
that's a fair point, because I kind of feel the same way. Like I did get into football like a little later when I was like on the back end of high school, and like just even now doing the podcast and like enjoying talking about football in this kind of capacity is something I never thought of pursuing as a kid. But now that we're seeing more women come on as analysts, more women come on as even just interviewing the players on the field, like as like being able to see a woman in that position and know that that's something that you could do in the future is very empowering.
Yeah, and you know what, thinking about especially you guys with the podcast, this is something that you kind of took into your own hands because you were like, okay, we need a space in this landscape that is for us, and maybe we don't see one right now, so we're going to create one. And I've been seeing a lot of groups and communities being formed that way. So there's a basketball podcast called Dishes and Dimes, like they're an all-female podcast. There's
awesome.
a group called South Asians in Sports, creating their own community. Elevation Nation creating. Mm-hmm. So there's lots of people taking it upon themselves, and I think it's time that we create more space systemically for us.
Yeah, a place where gatekeeping isn't a thing. I mean, you can see on the shelf behind me, like I live in fandoms and they're all gate kept, and it's just like, why is this a thing? Like I've watched sports since I was 2 years old. My dad, had me on his lap while the Blue Jays were winning the World Series. Like I've watched Montreal lift the cup. Like I've watched so many significant sports memories in Canadian history, the golden goal with Crosby, that it's like trying to constantly prove that I know my stuff when it comes to sports sometimes gets exhausting when I've probably watched more minutes than the average Chad. Right?
You can say that again. Oh my gosh, the amount of times that men have approached me knowing I'm a Chiefs fan, full on saying I'm a bandwagoner or just love Mahomes. And I'm like, let's get things straight here. If you know me, you know I hated that we picked Mahomes at that time during that draft. Of course I love him now, but it's just things like that, just the assumption that we like things in sports that are mainstream or bandwagon, or just because we know Tom Brady's name, we're going to say it in a conversation. That definitely needs to change.
Yeah. So we were wondering if you've ever experienced any barriers due to your gender working in professional sports, or if that's just kind of something that might be perpetuated by society, but not something you actually experience.
Yeah, I think in society in general, it can be a lot worse than it is when you've made a breakthrough into the space, because now that you're in, you've kind of passed that one barrier already. Like I've gotten a lot of comments sort of outside of a professional setting, much to the same kind of extent that Chelsea, you mentioned, people wanting to constantly test your knowledge or questioning the why behind your fandom or your motives or whatever it may be. In terms of the workspace, I think it comes a little bit differently. It's not so outwardly obvious. Sometimes it can be that you're in a room and you're the only woman in the room, or very often the only woman of color in the room, in a meeting, in a team, in a department. And although that's not something there's nothing outwardly wrong with that, it's also demoralizing and discouraging to know that everyone else is there because they look a certain way, and you're here because you've tried to push through that barrier so many times. And I've definitely had, certain experiences that I know would not have happened if I were a man, and this isn't specific to my current employer or anything like that, but I've definitely been in situations where maybe higher ups have made comments that I know they would not have made had I been a white man. So there's definitely still things like that you could classify as like locker room talk or the bro culture. Remnants of that still do exist. But I think we're definitely getting there.
Yeah. I like that you say barriers, but you've definitely broken through some barriers. Like, as much as I'm sure looking around, you don't see anyone who looks like you. Hopefully in, 5 years, hopefully in the next 10 years, we start seeing a lot more people who look like yourself, both person of color and a woman, as well as hopefully look like us, that are included in these spaces, because, there's a reason why scientists will call women better at math. It's just literally biologically there are reasons why we are stronger looking at numbers. So stats is something that, I've taught courses in, I've TA'd. I know statistics like the back of my hand, and it's like, yeah, I'm a stats nerd. I could run that stuff. So it's just seeing that there are people that would have some strengths that maybe you don't that people that are currently around don't have, or just different life experience too. It's always nice.
Even, going back to the questioning your why you like a team or why you root for a team. Like, I don't think I've ever heard a guy ask, who do you root for, and then tell them who it was, and then have a further conversation about why they like that team. So there's such a disparity even in the like regular day-to-day talk between men and women in sports and why you like certain sports. There's, I feel like, more obligation for women to know why they like a certain team than men, and that's also just very disheartening.
Yeah.
It's like you have to do double the work.
It's like, name 5 players from
sort
your
of
team.
half.
I hate
Name
that
the
one.
head coach. It's like, why you ask me that, I'm just gonna walk the other direction, because that is just so misogynistic for you to have to question why I like a certain team and who's on that team. Even if I say I like them, I could just I could like them because I like their colors. I'm sure there are guys out there that do the same fucking thing. So it gets annoying to a point that's just like, you don't want to answer them anymore. It's like, it's not even worth my time.
Yeah, and it can happen with anything. Like, I remember when the Raptors won the finals, and like, I'd grown up, I'd lived through the Vince Carter era, who phenomenal basketball player, but they just could never get through, and they would lose to the 76ers, or they would lose in like some of the most heartbreaking fashions. But the moment I say I'm a Raptors fan, or I posted, yay, go Raptors, or that's awesome, Kawhi, please stay, something like that, it was, well, who else do you know on that team?
Mm-hmm.
I'm like, well, obviously Siakam, he was MIP.
And then when you do list 5 players from that team, they're like extremely impressed with you. And I'm like, you want me to pick a different team? I can do a different team.
Yeah, let's go
want.
Celtics. Let's go. Like, do you want to change the sport? Like,
There's also there's that, like, I always get the misogynistic sort of like fake compliment or when they think they're complimenting you by saying like, you are so unique, you are so different. Oh my God, a woman who knows sports, like that's not the compliment that you think it is. In fact, it's
No, it's not.
insulting.
It's very insulting to be like, wow, you actually know sports. Like, known sports my whole life. What's new? Like, it's just, yeah, it's very disheartening, and it's something we have to deal with on a daily basis as just a regular sports fan. I couldn't imagine you have to dealing with it within your job as well. Is just crazy.
And you know what comes to mind kind of around that point too is, and you mentioned gatekeeping a little bit earlier too. I think it really discourages a lot of other women from showing interest in sports
Hmm.
from the get-go. So if someone wants to get into sports but doesn't necessarily know everything, the way that we get treated, and we know quite a bit, it's probably extremely off-putting for them. And so I'm very pro bandwagon. Like I think if everybody wants to like my sport and like be interested in my hobby, please, like the more, like it's more fun, right? When more people are involved.
That's
And
what I do with
gatekeeping
college
that, I think
football.
it's just so toxic and it's not.
I'm like, come like my sport. I don't care what team you root for. Just come watch college football with me.
Yeah. I'm like that with soccer. I'm like, someone loves soccer, please.
Drag all my friends into it. But moving on to our next question, then I guess, I mean, across all sports, what do you think that could be done to make women feel more included in, not even just in like day-to-day conversations with other men about sports, but in professional sports? What do you feel like could be done to make women feel more included in that atmosphere?
Yeah, a lot. I know small steps are being taken, and we see a lot of it in the media, and that's fantastic and all. But I think it's not moving fast enough, and the leaps are not big enough. I think hiring women at the highest level is where we need to start. So we don't just need more women in sports, we need women at the top in sports, because that's how you change everything. Is you get a woman's perspective at the top, and it sort of trickles down from there. But also a really big thing, like for myself, in my role, I look at people who are directors, VPs, the C-suite, and none of that, like the majority of them are not women. And that really is, even though I'm already in the world of sports, it seems like another barrier to me, for me to, grow and be promoted and be very successful, because there's still that barrier at the executive level. So hiring women in positions of leadership, I think, is going to be really critical. But also reevaluating hiring practices, so how we hire, and valuing different types of experiences, because a lot of people don't have the luxury of going to college or university, don't have the luxury of taking on unpaid internships or doing volunteer work, which, a lot of the sports world is exactly that. It's not the most lucrative business, and not a lot of people can afford to do that. And reevaluating things like compensations and benefits and parental leave, all of those things are, we know, critically more important to women for the most part than men. So I think that's a really good place to start. And the final thing, and arguably I think the most important thing, is men taking a stand against the way that the industry is going right now, because we know, and this is unfortunate, but we know that men listen to men. And so I could say something and a man can say something, but when a man says something, it's the same thing, but it means a lot more. And I think if we have a lot more men who are allies, I think we'll go a lot further.
I think that was a perfect answer. I couldn't agree with you more that it's not just these small positions or behind the scenes that we need to see women being included. It's in the top tier management, head coaching, CEO. Like that's where we need to see women for, like if a little girl like any of us were to see that, I'm sure our career paths would have been so different if we saw a woman analyzing the sport that we love when we were growing up. So I think it's very important.
Yeah, and taken seriously. Like I do remember seeing Kate Burness when I was younger, in on SportsCenter, TSN, one of the two sports shows I would watch. TSN, okay. And I remember seeing her and being like, "Oh, okay, cool. We exist in this realm." But there would be times when I was younger that she would say something or actually communicate a point, and it would immediately get dismissed. But then the anchor or someone else would make a similar point, and it was like, "Oh yeah, that's perfect." And it's like, "Oh, is she just there as like just to be there? Like, is she not there to talk?" Type thing. Now, obviously, it's gotten a lot better, and she is a phenomenal communicator and great at her job. Nothing against her. It was just how she was treated.
Yeah, I feel like it's even more disheartening when we were first seeing. I guess this is more the NFL and being specific about when you first started seeing women in the NFL, they were interviewing the players. They were on the field. They were on field reporters. They weren't in the studio. They weren't analyzing at halftime. Honestly, I don't even think I can say I've seen a woman analyze a football game at the halftime. Where they're all sitting in the studio talking about the game. So that's where I think it's going to be the hardest for of all the sports, the NFL to include women. And I think that's just because it's a very male dominated sport playing wise. But I guess this is just going to bring us into our next question because, like I said, it's hard to see or I guess justify women being analysts in the NFL when we've maybe at most played flag football. Like, I don't think there's any sort of like full on contact women's football out there that you could compare with being like, being able to take your personal experience on the field and analyzing it in the studio. So we've seen this past season with the NBA that they had an all female broadcast. That was fantastic to see. And it was also in part because they do have a WNBA. You do have women that play in a professional league, and they're also able to analyze that. So maybe just sports and like other sports in general, do you think we're going to see more of these all female led broadcasts for different sports?
I mean, I hope so. I think the NBA is probably one of, if not the most progressive of the major leagues in terms of how they approach, equity.
Yep.
And so I've seen a lot of things start with the NBA and then have, the NHL follow suit, and the NFL follow suit. And so I hope this is one of those things that starts to spread more widely. And not to be cheesy, but like that broadcast honestly pretty much brought me to tears because I thought about if I had seen that 20 years ago, how amazing that would have been. So it's an interesting point you bring up in terms of like having those personal experiences in order to contribute to analysis. I don't know how critical that is. I don't work on the media side, so that's not nowhere near my expertise.
I don't know. It seems more plausible for the NBA to do it first. I could see the NHL following up next with an all-female broadcast because you do have a women's hockey league. You do have like women that play in hockey in the Olympics. So I do think that at least for the analyzing aspect that happens around sports broadcasting, that there is more of a like want for someone who has the professional experience actually playing the sport. So that's why I see kind of the NFL on the back end of this list, maybe one of the last people to do an all-female broadcast or even just include females in analyzing. Because that's something I would possibly be interested in the future, especially after starting this show. It's something I never thought I would want to do, but 10 years down the road, maybe it is something I would want to do. And it's disheartening for me to see no women really analyzing football.
Yeah. And so that kind of brings me to a question that I was hoping to ask you is, what does your ideal NFL look like?
Oh, wow. My
Loaded
ideal
question.
NFL would definitely have more female coaches. I think even just one like head coach. We have a lot. We see, I think there's like 4 or 5 assistant coaches out there on various teams. that are female. There's, I believe, the CEO of the Eagles is now a female, and that's more or less really all I hear or see about women in the NFL. So I would definitely love to see more on field. I mean, this past college football season, we saw a female kicker come on the field and make history, kicking off for, I believe it was Vanderbilt. Who's not to say that a female kicker could end up in the NFL? That's something else I'd love to see too. Is a female player in the NFL. I don't think that it would make sense to make a completely different league for women when we've seen a woman play with men in college and it's been fine. So I think, yeah, it's not even just the studio for me. It's on the field. It's that work, that coaching, that kind of like the actual football play. That's not something I think I could ever do because I've coached our sorority football team at Greek Olympics, but that's about it. So it's that aspect I think I would like to see. And then I think if I'm honestly going to be very realistic about it, I would just love to see one female analyzing on a big time network, like analyzing football. I think that would be like just the foot in the door kind of thing for me.
Yeah, for me, it's funny. I don't have an ideal NFL yet, but I do have steps I'd love to see the NFL take. I don't think the NBA gets enough credit for its players and its seemingly or how it seems to willingly work with the WNBA and promote and work with like Seabird and everyone and try to get the WNBA up and lift it up to a pedestal. And, hearing people like LeBron James, Kyrie Irving, all these big name dudes come out and say, well, no, these women can play. Like, have you watched them play? Like, they're doing things that you've never seen them do. They're dunking the ball. Like, seeing the men and the players in the league really lift up the women has been great to see. And while there might not be a direct comparison in the NFL to a women's tackle football or a professional women's league, there are women that are trying to be involved in the league that I believe they could support more vocally in terms of the coaches, as well as the NFL does actually have a program, and I'm not sure if the NBA has one like this, where there are all the women that work in the NFL actually have formed a community and a committee to help people who want to work in the league get into the league. So something like that to actually be more formalized by the NFL and the NFLPA to try and actually make it more known.
Woman helping woman, man.
Yeah.
Gotta love it. Gotta love it. I love that.
I didn't know that.
Came out. Yeah, that's some news to me, and that's some very nice news knowing if I ever wanted to go work in there that there is a committee that can help get past those barriers for women. So I think that's very noble that they've decided to band together and do that.
Yeah, it was great for me to learn that. I actually was, I've applied for my master's in physical therapy and I want to apply to physiotherapy as at any sports league anywhere. Like even I might apply out to Europe. And then I was like looking, oh, well, if I could work for the NFL, how could I do it? And I was just like Googling around and this popped up and I was like, oh, okay, how is this not anything anyone knows about? Because this is a really cool little feature. So I'm hoping one day we will see more women in any semblance or any
For the
position.
girls.
For the girls, any position in any professional league. But I just want to thank
I don't
you.
own any Raptor stuff.
Yeah. One day we have to go to see a game then. We'll have to go see a game and get you.
Yes.
You are more than welcome.
Get you a jersey. But I
Bring
can't
us your special guest, Nash.
Yeah. Yeah. We'll just be like, yeah, you rule. But I just want to thank you so much for coming on and chatting. I do understand that we did send you some tough questions, but your responses were really, really insightful, and I'll definitely take a lot away from the conversation. So I thoroughly appreciate you taking time out of your day.
I had a blast. Thank you so much for having me.
Yeah, so, and now we'll have the not so well thought out segue into the outro of the show. Catch you on the other side, guys.
That was such a good conversation. I love her so much. And thank you again, Naj, for coming on the show and being with us.
Yeah, no, she had great insight. But I'm actually wondering, Chelsea, since your ideal NFL, as you described, involved more women in invisible places, both on the field and in analyst roles, how do you think we get there? Because you did bring up that excellent point that it is extremely difficult considering the closest many women will get to it is professional flag football. Like, I understand some can play in tackle leagues. It's not very common.
Yeah, I mean, it was this past year we saw the first female to ever ref a Super Bowl. And it's crazy to think that it was 2021 and this is the first time we're seeing a female ref a Super Bowl game. So it's like it's starting there, like getting to see them on the field, seeing, I believe her name was Sarah Fuller, who
The kicker.
kicked for Vanderbilt's football team. It's seeing stuff like that and seeing it happen more often and not just the female reporters just interviewing the players on the field and being that face. It's being involved in the actual sport. So just starting there on on camera roles where you can see it, and also what Nash said too is you won't see that without seeing them in the higher up positions too. And we have started seeing the Eagles now have a female CEO. So I think that that's where it needs to start, and it's finally happening. I just feel like it's so late.
Yeah, it's been fascinating to watch, I guess, the generation at least below me. I don't know if you're part of the generation right below me, if we're the same generation, but
I think we're the same.
yeah, it feels like the one just below us has really helped with some progress. I'm not saying that our generation hasn't done anything. It's just, I can't imagine seeing any of this when I was younger. I truly couldn't.
I actually cried when I watched Sarah kick for Vanderbilt. Like when she ran onto the field and kicked the ball, I actually shed a tear because I never thought I'd see the day we'd see a female in a college football game. It's insane.
And then
I love it.
we also have, there's a female goalie who just got drafted into the OHL. Like, so it is starting to happen. Yeah, she's actually
That's amazing.
really darn good. Like Sarnia, I believe it's for Sarnia, and they used a pretty high draft pick for her. So it was great to see. But it's something I never would have or could have seen. Like, yeah, I when I was playing soccer, I was playing against boys since I was, super young. But I do remember that once we hit, U16, U17, it was, well, you're not allowed. Like, you can't play. Girls should go play on the women's side. And none of that was inherent. Like, it's inherently sexist, but it was not intentionally. Like, I didn't find my guy friends on those teams were saying, no, you can't play with us, you're bad. It was, like, no, current custom is like you have to go over there, the rules state.
Yeah, I remember when I used to play like soccer in elementary school, and like when we played like the Timbit League, like when you're really little, it's all mixed. But the second you get to like grade 3 or 4, they decide to split you up as if it's like not fair that we all play together. And I think that that's ridiculous because we can all play together.
Yeah, and I hate how it's always under the guise of getting hurt. Like, I'm sorry, but if you watch women's soccer compared to men's soccer, the men are bitches. They're little pussies. They get hit and they're rolling around. You'll see. Now, I don't personally like the Americans, like soccer team, but you'll see half of their players. Like, you'll see one of their midfielders get absolutely wrecked, and she's married to a tight end who plays for the Eagles. She's
Zach Ertz.
Yeah, she's married to Ertz. Julie Ertz will get hit, and she's broken her nose. You see blood streaming down. They go put the cotton in, and then she's running. She gets absolutely bombed across the head. She lands on her side and is like, okay, let's keep going. I'm like, either of those had happened to the men's side, it would have been like a waste of 6 minutes, 7 minutes.
We know how precious our time is, okay?
Yeah, so I just hate how it's always under the guise of, well, we don't want to hurt you. It's like, well,
Like that comes with playing the sport. Like we're really like well aware of what we're getting ourselves into, and it's just that people aren't letting us.
yeah. Like if we want to intentionally sign up to get our bones broken, potentially,
I'm a little too old for that now.
go for it. Yeah, no.
Just a little too old for that now, but
I'll gladly watch someone try though.
I guess that's all we have for this week's episode. Thank you again, Nash, for coming on the show. It was a pleasure having her on and speaking with her, and I just love what she had to say. But don't forget to like, comment, subscribe, share, rate, and review the show. The show is available to listen on Spotify and Apple Podcasts, as well as our website, Primetime Time. Oh my God, it's such a tongue twister. PrimetimeDimes.com. We only have just over a month left without football, so stay tuned for a little more off-season updates before we actually get into NFL preseason and hopefully the actual season very soon. And we'll see you guys next Wednesday.
See you next Wednesday.
Listen in to Primetime Dimes every Wednesday for your latest on football.